Welcome to this video in which I'm going to show you how I made this wonderful little sketchbook. Me and my friend Susanna, who came to visit me from the Netherlands, went to this place called the Basler Papiermühle, which is a museum in a medieval paper mill. I think it's the oldest paper mill in all of Switzerland, but it might be the oldest paper mill in all of Europe. It's very cool. Basel's like the center for bookbinding and like paper making and printing of Switzerland, if I recall correctly. And we got to like print our own things and play around and learn lots about how they used to make paper and how they used to print things, what a watermark is, which it used to be like a little piece of metal that was on the mold. You know how you make paper with a mold and decal and you have this big tub of paper fibers? It used to be just an actual little piece of metal on the... It's crazy. And while we were there, my friend said that I could pick out a little trinket as a gift for letting her stay with me. So here's what I picked out. 12 sheets of this beautiful cotton handmade square paper. And I just knew I was going to make it into a sketchbook. So I took the measurements and figured out how big the little book would be, especially folded in half, when I folded the sheets in half, how big that the book would be. I made sure to clean my table and wash my hands before this so that no dirt got on the pages. And in the end, it's going to be 21 by 10.5 centimeters, which is like, I don't know. It's smaller than an A5, but only slightly. And I took these very random measurements that I thought made a nice pattern and wrote them out on the edge of this piece of paper with the same width as my sheets, which at this point I've already folded in half. I folded them in half by measuring the middle point. You can see these little marks that I made with a pencil. And the needle tool I'm using now to poke the holes, according to the template I made, I used that to score a line using a ruler, and then I folded them in half. I've lost my folding bone, my bone folder. I lost it. I don't know where it is, so I just had to fold it by hand. But scoring really helped, and it made sure that the thick paper didn't get damaged. And here you can see I'm adding another hole at the top and the bottom, just to make sure that the book would hold together nicely. And then I'm just going to go and do that to every single page. I'm doing it on top of this little piece of corrugated cardboard so that I can poke through and not like bump into the table or something. And I think usually you'd use an awl for this, but I just use this little drill bit that I put a big needle in. I think it's a doll rerouting needle. But I just use that instead of an awl, and it works wonderfully. So then when I had all of those folded pieces of paper stacked together, before binding it, apparently I went and cut out this piece of fabric. This, I think, was like an old little tank top for someone. It wasn't mine. And I used the straps to be able to close the book. This is quite a synthetic material, quite plasticky, so it feels kind of nice, but it doesn't act the same. It's moving really fast. I'm picking out some thread that I feel matches decently with the fabric I'm using for the cover. I never use book cloth, simply because I try to use what I have. Which is also why that I'm mixing 3 separate types of thread, because that's what I have. I don't have a thread that perfectly matches, but so I'm using this mix of 3, which I think turned out pretty nicely. I wound it around my watercolor palette just to get enough of it and not make a huge mess and a huge tangle. And it's not a perfect match, but I think it looks quite nice. And then I put that through my curved needle and I started sewing. And you start with one piece of paper. Why that I'm having a bit of trouble here is that usually you'd make signatures of multiple pieces of paper stacked together. But because this paper is so thick, I'm just using one. Here I'm putting tape on it to hold the thread in place. But this paper is quite delicate, so it ends up ripping it. It's fine, but it was a bit sad. So I'm going in to the inside of the paper and then going out and just following around the whole piece of paper and then going back again and then tying a knot. You can see how like the full spine of the folded piece of paper has thread in it. That's what you want for your first piece, just so that you have something for the next. I'm just gonna call it signatures for the next signatures to attach to. And I tie a good big knot, and then I add the second piece. And you just go into the first hole. And here I had a funny little setup where often you'll evenly space all of your holes, but I did a little pattern where in the holes close together, it would just come out and go back in. Or no, the holes far apart. And then there's some holes that are closer together, and there I would go... I think... Just look at what I'm doing. You can see here that I'm going around that little piece of thread and skipping going back into the book. And I'm just doing that because I think it looks nicer. You can also tell that often when binding a book, the needle will come out and you'll go on the same side. This doesn't make any sense. Here I'm tying a little knot at the top just to make sure that the thread doesn't move. Here, I'm not teaching you to bookbind. I'm just showing you what I did. But I noticed that when I come out of the hole, if I kind of go around the other stitch backwards, rather than in the same direction that I'm sewing, I can pull the signature tighter without ripping the paper nearly as often. So there's my little pattern that I have. You can tell that there's the little top stitches, and then there's the wide stitches far apart from each other, right? Go out, go around, and go back in. And then there's the smaller stitches where there's a gap where I skip going back in. This is really abstract to explain. I didn't realize how confusing it was to explain bookbinding. Here you can see again how I'm kind of going backwards when it comes to my direction of stitching, and then I go back in to the signature, and it makes like a little cross pattern on the back. Here is the other thing I do, which is just go around the past stitch and then go back in, which creates a cross pattern as well, but a different one. And I never used to use a curved needle, and then I got one in like a needle kit. It makes such a difference. Using a curved needle makes such a difference. I used to have this weird way of holding it where one finger would be between the last signature and the signature before that, and the other one would be in the middle of the new signature, and I'd have to like flip around. Having a curved needle and just being able to go between the signatures, highly recommend if you buy one bookbinding tool that it be a curved needle. But so I'm just continuing with my little mixed thread, going in and out and in and out, and following my same pattern and trying to pull tight, but not so tight that the spine curves in on itself. And then when I finish, you can see I barely had any thread left, but I tie a little knot, pull it tight, and there is our book block finished. No, it's not finished. We need to add the end pages, but the sewing for the book is not even done. We have more sewing to do, but you basically have a book now. Next, I'm taking this 1mm bookbinding cardboard. I think that's what it's called. And I'm cutting out a piece as wide as the little sewn thing I just made for the spine, and then 2 pieces slightly taller than the book, but slightly less wide than the book to be the cover. And you make it slightly less wide so that there's a gap. It's called the hinge gap. You can see here I glued the spine to this piece of paper, and then I marked off a line a bit far away from the spine to glue the cover pieces to. And then we're gluing the spine of the book rather than the spine of the cover, which we were just gluing. And usually you'd use this thing called mull, which I think is starched mesh. I don't have that, again, using what I have. So I'm using this little piece of cheesecloth. And it's not necessarily the easiest to work with, but it does the job. So again, just using what I have. And you can see I have a big bucket of bookbinding glue, which is just acid-free PVA glue, I think. You can also see I have some little clamps on the book with a piece of corrugated cardboard in between, just to make sure that the signatures, the pieces of paper, are as close together as possible so that not too much glue seeps in between them. I'm not going to cut that out. You're welcome. You get to hear me make so many mistakes. It's fine. And I'm using just this big brush. I think I should use a stiffer brush. This brush is quite floppy, and I think it meant that my glue, I just used way too much glue. This is, if you're a professional bookbinder, look away. Look away. This is possibly my sloppiest gluing job ever in my life. And it turned out fine in the end, and I'm happy with it, but this, like, it hurt to look back on and to edit. I made such a mess. But I'm brushing a thin layer of glue onto the cover and then putting it on top of the piece of fabric I cut out to be quite a bit larger than the finished cover. And I'm just doing one cover, and then I'm doing the spine, and I'm just trying to smooth the fabric on there. If you're using book cloth, I think because it has a backing to it, it's easier. But I'm just using fabric.
This is why people use book cloth.
Now we're picking out end papers. I've been finding these like books full of huge sheets of art paper, and they're so beautiful, and they're perfect for using them as end papers. So that's what I'm doing. I cut out 2 pieces that are the same size as my little book, and then first I'm gluing down the edges of the cheesecloth. As you can see here, I'm brushing on a little layer of glue, pushing the cheesecloth into it, and then going over it again, and then pressing on the end pages. And now you have a book block. However, I like to have the extra little bit of security that the end pages aren't the only thing holding the book in the cover. So I added 3 more strips of cheesecloth on the edge over top of the end pages. Now we're working on the closure. I made these funny little holes in the back cover that I'm now feeding the straps through. You'll also hopefully be able to see that I've carved away a couple of the layers of the cardboard and pre-made some holes. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the straps that I'm feeding through the holes now, kind of clumsily, and I'm going to glue them down. Here we go. You can kind of see it looks a bit like a cracker. I'm going to use cemented, which is just an all-purpose glue, and delicious. I'm going to tape it down to make sure it can dry. And I have these tiny little pieces of cardboard to glue back into the holes so that the straps are held in really tight. I'm really worried about the straps just slipping out, so I'm securing them with by any means necessary, with everything that I have, all the materials, all the little tricks. I'm employing every single one of them to make sure this doesn't fall apart. After those pieces are glued in place, I am re-poking the holes with a needle tool to make sure that they're easily visible. And then I'm going to take the same thread I used to sew the signatures or the pieces of paper together, and I'm sewing through those holes in kind of a diamond pattern. And that is, again, to make sure that the straps I'm using to close the book are securely in place. This way they're sewn into not only the cardboard but also the cover material, and then they're also going to be sealed in there with more wood glue, bookbinding glue. I have used wood glue for bookbinding. I think it's a bit too stiff. Anyways, I'm just going back and forth with a regular sewing needle this time, not a curved one. And you can see that I'm actually sewing every bit twice and making sure to catch here, there, the strap is a bit misaligned, so I'm going through to make sure I catch it. And I'm going through every hole twice just so that it's super secure, but also so that it looks pretty on the outside. I've been doing this for a while now, and I find that this can be like a little ornamental detail, and at the same time it adds so much structure to the closure of the book, which I really appreciate. I feel really happy that I figured out this silly little method. So once I've sewn in and out through all of the holes to make this funky little pattern, I am taking the thread inside, tying a little knot, and gluing it out of the way. I'm tying the knot, gluing it, and then like securing it, I guess. I just want to make sure it doesn't go anywhere, and so I'm gluing it. And I'm using this knot to keep it closed, which is a knot I learned from all of the fiber work I do with like yarn and crochet. And I think it's called a magic knot, and you can tie 2 knots on both sides of a piece of yarn and then pull it so that you have a very sturdy knot that also is quite small. So now I've skipped over the bit where I'm doing the gluing. I'm first gluing the little top corners down, and I'm using the little binder clips to keep it all in place. This is not meant to be instructional. This is such a messy gluing job. But at the end, while that I moved on to work on other things, I used a little piece of cardboard and some baking paper to hold all the pieces in place. I usually go corners first, then the short edges, then the long edges. And I just made such a mess with the glue this time around. But that's what the cover looks like. I think it's still quite cute. Now I found this red ribbon in my craft supplies, and I'm cutting it at an angle and melting the little edge. I probably could have done this neater, but this is how I did it. And I am using more glue to glue it to the spine, and then I am going to glue another piece of cheesecloth over it just to make sure that it's really like attached to the book. And now it's time to assemble. So I'm putting some baking paper between the first end page and the second end page, I guess, brushing a thin layer of glue onto it, and then like putting the spine on the spine of the cover and letting the end page fall into place. It's really a thing of like, don't let the book know you're scared, because it can smell fear and it will fuck it up for you. But this one, looking back at the footage, it went surprisingly well. Next, I figured out that actually by scratching at the glue stains, I could make them look a lot less visible. So that is what I did. And now we're almost done with the video, so I hope you enjoyed watching me make this very, very chaotic book, and yeah, bye! So here's what the book looks like right now. You can see that I have a lot of glue stains, especially on the spine. The one on the surface, on like the front of the book, I've kind of been able to scratch them off and make them less visible, but they're still definitely there. I've never made a book with deckled edges like this before, which I really like the look of it. And then how it opens, it's really quite satisfying to me. And then we have the end pages. This one, it cracked here at the top. And we also here have a little bit that got scratched up. I'm fine with that. It will get more scratched up with use and age and all of that. The bookmark, I'm okay with the way that it is attached. It's wider than the book, which is a bit clumsy, but it's fine to me. And then here in the front, first thing I did was swatch all of my watercolors. I usually start my sketchbooks with like a swatch of this watercolor palette, but for this one, I really had to do it because the book just so perfectly is the exact same size as the palette. So that's how I made this little sketchbook. And hopefully you'll see me You can see it's still a little stiff because I haven't used her much. Hopefully you'll see me painting in this soon. See you next time.